Well, hi, we're here with Kelsey Hoeper. Kelsey, welcome.
Thank you.
And like all of these little recorded interviews, kind of recordings, it's really with the aim to get to know each coach on our team. So I guess my first question is, who are you? And tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I currently live in the city of Chicago, like actually in the city with my husband. And originally, I'm from Southern Oregon, where I grew up with my parents and younger brother. Um, Growing up, I was busy, but in a manageable, enjoyable way. Always was involved in sports, loved reading, writing, traveling. Fast forward, I moved out of my small Southern Oregon town to Illinois, and I went to Lake Forest College, where I graduated in 2013. And then I went on to earn my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Roosevelt University. So I am a therapist. And before joining NSEF, I worked in higher education. I worked as a swim coach, I worked as a recruiter. I've also worked in private practice as a therapist and dedicated some time to supporting the community as a grief counselor. So I worked in hospice, and I also did a lot of grief education in schools and places of work. And then I guess last but not least, I also have a background in suicide prevention and in the nonprofit sector. So I've dipped my toes into a lot of different fields over the years. And I think the only thing that I can think of to add to that is I work with NSEF part-time, and I also work as an eating disorders therapist as well.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about executive functioning. With your varied background, it makes you so unique as an EF coach. What got you interested in executive functioning?
That's a great question. So I sat with this question more than any other, and not for like any bad reason. I've been reflecting, I think, on what it means to just be a person in this modern life. Like I think as humans, we are being asked to do things faster and faster, to do more and more, and we are receiving and processing constant stimulation from like the moment we wake up, and go to bed. And this has been forcing our brains to just process more data information than I think that we've ever had before in human history. So, like, no wonder so many of us are struggling to keep up, stay focused, keep motivation high. I've also seen firsthand how so many of us struggle, and myself included at times, where I think like these rumination processes and excessive worry just produces so much frustration and not a lot of gain, not a lot of movement. And that's not because we lack talent. It's just we get ruts in our mind, and we can struggle to get out of those ruts. Lucky for us, the brain is very capable of changing and adapting. We can teach old dogs new tricks. And there's this famous saying, and I can't remember who actually credited, but there's this saying that neurons that fire together wire together. And if that's the case, like it's just about firing them in like the right direction or a different direction. So if our brains like to jump tracks and turn right, well, then we can jump tracks and turn straight or turn right. Um, so I think like success in executive functioning is not really about time management and productivity like so many of us think. I mean, it is that, but then it's so much more than that. So I think I became really interested in and functioning because of that very same thing. I like debunking the myths of what EF is. Success is being able to move that toggle switch. And so when a person starts to ruminate or slip into negative thinking, and when they're worrying, they're fretting, like look elsewhere, do anything, jump up and down, pet your dog, read a few pages of your book, focus on your breathing. I think it's just about a lot of it's just redirection. Um, and I think that no matter if you're someone who is on the autism spectrum, ADHD, maybe you're struggling with depression, I think that all humans struggle and can benefit from EF techniques, all of us, from someone who's super, super high achieving, really anybody. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me in. Um, I like working with folks when it comes to engaging the mind, staying in action, making your life easier on purpose, and finding solutions that are actually going to work for us, finding our spark. So really all of us can really benefit from EF skills and techniques. So I think that's what really drew me to it, just the universal nature of it.
Well, let's actually back up, because for those who don't really know what executive function is, how would you define executive functioning?
Yes. So I like to first put out some thoughts about what EF is not. And I think EF really, like if we really break it down, it's not about being perfect. It's not about being motivated 100% of the time, because that's impossible. First of all, we're setting ourselves up for failure if we go into a coaching session with that mindset. So I think when we really break it down, executive functioning is about time, energy, skills acquisition, planning, and maintenance that goes into our care, school, work, and life tasks. I think it's about thinking flexibly. It's about emotion regulation. I think that's something that we forget. It is very much about our emotions. It's reasoning, it's planning ahead, it's problem solving. And I think it's about being able to identify the coping skills to deal with barriers and building up tolerance to uncomfortable emotions as well, like anxiety and overwhelm. So these emotions don't completely dictate the kind of day we're going to have. So I think too, like mindset and self-compassion are also the foundations of executive functioning, I think. But unfortunately, when we find that we're struggling to complete tasks, we feel so much shame, or we can feel so much shame. Like, how can I be failing at something that's so simple? And that internal dialogue can quickly get in the way and totally sabotage us. So when I think about EF, I think about self-kindness. I think about channeling that good enough energy at times. It's about resting. It's about skill building and remembering that absolutely no one can do it all. No one has limitless capacity.
Yeah, I think that the part about compassion is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, because a lot of clients, and tell me if you agree, think if I'm compassionate with myself, then I'm already struggling to function. So whatever it is that I'm supposed to do, the shoulds, right? Whatever I'm supposed to do, I'm not doing it. Or even what I want to do, I'm expected to do, I'm not doing the things. So if I allow myself and tell myself, that's okay, Maggie, if you're not doing the things, then that's dangerous, slippery slope. Like compassion is the enemy. How would you, have you heard that? And how would you respond?
Oh yeah. And I will be totally honest with you. I had the same thought. Like, I think a lot of folks think that if you invoke self-compassion, you're letting yourself off the hook. Like, but it's not like, I don't want to do the hard thing and that's okay. It's more like, I'm really struggling in this moment. And I know I'm not alone in that. And what I need right now is a 5-minute break and to get some fresh air. And when I feel like I have taken that moment to myself to regroup, it sets me up for better success to tackle the thing that maybe I've been avoiding. And there's a huge difference between this is a moment of suffering, I'm not alone, and what am I going to do? What do I need right now? That's going to be more motivating than, why can't I do this? I'm so stupid. I can't do anything right. Like we're digging ourselves deeper and deeper into that hole. And it's so much harder to climb out of that. And think about someone that does that every day, multiple times a day. If shame and self-criticism worked, we wouldn't be literally doing this interview right now. We would have figured it out by now, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think even, one of the things we always talk about North Shore executive functioning is pause and plan. So there's the pause going, can I take 5 minutes? Can I walk to the end of my driveway? It doesn't have to be a big thing. Can I take a breath? There's the pause. The part that I always hear with clients is, but what's the plan? But what's the plan? And I go, oh, absolutely. We want the plan, but we don't skip over the pause. We also don't get stuck in the pause, because that becomes the avoidance part. That's I deserve a break. And that actually can be a really positive propelling energy, exactly like you're describing. The problem when it's I don't know quite how to move forward, there's that plan part. That's what I think you do so beautifully, right? Is helping clients pause, figure it out, reset, regroup, recognize this is not a deficiency. This is not something that the drill sergeant needs to come out because the drill sergeant is the only way. And then what? Then what's next? Kind of what's the plan beyond that? So on that very note, actually, maybe you can dig into a little bit of the nitty gritty when it comes to coaching. So people ask all the time, what does a typical coaching session look like? And I say, that depends on the client. Maybe instead of answering that question, you can answer the question of some of the exercises you really love, you enjoy using as an EF coach.
Definitely. There's two or three kind of floating around in my head. And I think one that comes up is I'm a huge fan of the phrase, manage your energy, not your time. There's a huge difference because if I'm sitting on my couch scrolling through Instagram, I have the time to do the thing, but I might not have the energy. There's the completely different things. And I think restoration, we need time to restore. This protects us against burnout, which all of us are prone to, especially those that are incredibly busy, have demanding schedules. You just have a lot on your plate, right? So restoration requires decompression, and decompression involves taking the pressure off. So I think of it in two things. There's such a thing as passive relaxation. That's like taking a nap, watching TV. And then there's active relaxation where maybe it's cooking or organizing, or you get a lot of joy out of painting or drawing or, going to a party, right? Basically you're renewing yourself through an activity that holds meaning to you. So different types of rest help us restore our creativity and our motivation. So I think like we need to have a healthy rotation of coping skills in our arsenal and burnout strategies at our disposal, because I think like anything that helps you feel restored is worthy of your time. So what I've encouraged my students in the past to do is to consider and plan for how they're going to incorporate both passive relaxation and active relaxation into their days every day, because you are not going to be operating at the capacity that you want to if you're depleted. It's just not going to work. So that's a technique I like to bring in really in the beginning, is like, okay, you have all your to-do things, but how are you going to make time for all these other things that you need to get you through the next day? So that's something that I like to do. And as we know, the mind is powerful. Our thoughts have a huge impact on our emotions and behaviors. So it's a skill more than a technique, but it's the art of reframing. Reframing is one of the most powerful skills there is. And reframes are powerful because one of the best ways to change the way that we think is to change the way that we speak. Language is so powerful. So instead of saying, I don't know what to do, replace that with, I'm ready for a new strategy. Instead of, I have no idea what I want, replace that with, I'm imagining what is possible for me. Or instead of like, I'm so anxious, I'm having anxious energy, or I have anxious energy. Like, you are not your anxiety, you are not your depression, right? So I think reframing is an incredibly important tool. And then I think the last thing that comes up for me as like a skill, a technique, is I'm a big fan of doing things that are going to make our lives easier. Like, so if you're not a morning person, then maybe the night before you put your clothes out on the dresser so you don't even have to think about it. You have a breakfast ready that you can throw in the microwave or the oven, right? There's no cooking required. Or if you find that you're spending enormous amounts of energy folding your laundry in this really specific way, I might be like, is what you're doing necessary? Like, I remember talking with a friend and she's like, I spend hours a week folding my baby's clothes, but she throws them around the room anyway. And I was like, there you go. So like, give time back to yourself, find easier and more accessible ways to get things done.
Love it. I love it. I'm thinking of a million different applications of all of those. And I just love it. One of the things we often talk about is pause, plan, and then the third is play,
Mm-hmm.
which play can mean lots of different things. But you're so right, as a strategy, as a defense mechanism against burnout, that we can recognize we can do both. There's that compassion again. We can do both. We can hold space for ourselves to play. I don't have time to play, just like clients say, I don't have time to plan, just have to do. I don't have time to plan. Okay, right? I believe you. And at the same time, let's look at how that's working. Let's look at how it's working for you. I love it. So tell me a little bit here about actually when there's a client who struggles with executive functioning, what are some ways that you would approach it? So how does, it's kind of, again, the typical coaching session, but what does a trajectory of getting from point A to point whatever look like?
Sure. Well, first, I really value motivational interviewing, and in that, I really want to understand where the student is at, what their goals are, what season of life they're in, too. I think that's really important. I think context is really important. And on that same vein, what's getting in the way of you feeling accomplished, successful, motivated, etc. I reference the stages of change really often in my coaching sessions, even in my therapy sessions. Well, I mean, like, well, why? Well, because if you're familiar with the stages of change model, people change when actually I'll backtrack. People don't want to change when someone's telling them you have to change and you have to do it this way. Like there's something happens, like there's an immediate defense mechanism, like I'm not doing that, even though in our head we're like, well, maybe it will work, right? People change when they've given themselves time to first contemplate what's working for them and what's not working for them. We need to be able to see the relevance of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Like I think intention is everything. There has to be some level of buy-in for us to want to do things differently. So I do a lot of digging there first. I also like to help my students understand what their strengths are and what their vulnerabilities are. Um, I think I've talked to a lot of people that are like nervous about talking about what vulnerabilities and maybe like what they're quote unquote not good at, but like we're all really good in some areas and we struggle in others, and that doesn't make us deficient in any way. It's just like, let's shine a light on where you need a little nudge, right? And then I like to take a really individualized approach to help that person create systems for managing their energy, their time, their space, their tasks. I help to encourage folks to think about what it could be like to cultivate a growth mindset. That's another piece I bring in as well. In addition to understanding what it is that brings that student joy and what they find meaningful. I really like to work with students to consider how they want to handle future problems as well. Because I think I'm a big fan of like what's going on in the immediate moment. This thing didn't really work out. Well, how can I use that information to help me the next time this happens, right? So I think like we've already chatted about, Mackie, mindfulness and self-compassion is another element that I bring in. So I guess to kind of wrap it up is a typical session for me could look like the first 5-10 minutes, we put time and attention to what could it look like to get you in a really good learning environment? Do we need to do a grounding activity or a relaxation activity? Do we need to get the energy up? Like, do you need to do 10 jumping jacks to get your heart rate up after you've been laying on the couch for a while, right? And then after we set up the good learning environment, then I'd like to transition to, 30 minutes or so of practice techniques that are paired with real world tasks and issues that student wants to bring in. And then I always leave time at the end for evaluation, planning, review, right? What are you going to focus on this week? How are you going to implement this? What's your week going to look like? That's how I would really like to structure a typical session.
Yeah. And you keep using the word student. Just to clarify, what are the ages that you work with? You coach with adults, emerging adults, students. Give folks a taste.
Definitely. And I use student to kind of like a catch-all for
Mhm.
anyone. Like I consider myself to be a student. I student of life, if you will. But
Mhm.
I work with children around like middle school and up, honestly. I would say that of all of the folks that I've worked with in a coaching capacity in a therapeutic setting, I would say the bulk of my folks are usually between the ages of like 13 and 30, actually. So, and I am happy to work with folks of all ages. You know, that's like the beautiful thing that I want to just share. Like if you are in your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, and you're like, oh, but am I too old for this? Like, no, you're not. Come on in, you know. So I work with pretty much all ages starting from middle school and on.
Yeah, that's helpful to clarify.
Mm.
So you actually were talking about strengths and weaknesses. You pulled what I was going to ask next, which our company is a strengths-based company. It's so often, it's kind of like the pause and skip over the pause and get right to the plan. We skip over the strengths of what we're doing really well and focus and laser focus and fixate sometimes on what we're doing wrong. So I want to ask you what you're doing right. What are some of your strengths?
Yes, yes. As far as my own strengths, I believe myself to be a creative person. I've always prided myself on my ability to step into places of empathy, really joining people where they're at. Very dedicated. I love the feeling of a new project. It invigorates me, it excites me. Um, I think I have a pretty good sense of humor, but I really do try, when it's warranted, of course, to bring humor into my coaching sessions as much as possible. Like laughing is good for the nervous system, it's good medicine, helps us not feel so awkward sometimes. So humor is a big thing for me, and so many things bring me joy. Gumball machines, skipping rocks, hammocks, the sound of rain, fish tacos, weighted blankets, coffee, rewatching beloved TV shows. And one of my favorite things in the world is being around people who laugh so hard that they start to cry. So I love seeing others succeed. That brings me joy too.
Yeah. What about weaknesses? Let's talk about some of your areas for improvement.
Yeah. Well, I will be the first to say I'm not perfect. It's never something that I'm going to strive to be. And I'm still figuring things out myself. And I think that's always going to be the case. Like we as humans are always in a state of becoming. The work is never done, but I think that's the exciting part. And I actually think that that mindset takes a lot of pressure off of us because like, when's the finish line? When's the finish line? Like, sweetie, there is no finish line. You just keep on moving. But with that being said, I absolutely have struggled to get stuff done myself. 100%. I will owe that till the end of the day. But especially tasks that I just find boring. Like honestly, like we can name that. Like doing your taxes is not as an especially fun thing to do. So there's that. But I'll be honest, I have been working on strengthening my own self-compassion. Just because it's a big part of my practice doesn't mean that I'm an expert at it. I am my biggest critic, and I have a tendency to be really tough on myself unnecessarily. And I think, definitely in this country, if we're not happy at any given moment, we immediately go to, well, I must be doing something wrong. I'm not happy, right? Well, no, not really. There are seasons of life to which tasks overwhelm us, and I'm working on normalizing challenges. I'm working on normalizing tough emotions and just like trying to take a very neutral stance to things at times is something that I've had a really hard time with. We are all prone to what we call cognitive distortions, black and white thinking, predicting the future, catastrophizing. Yeah, I'll be the first to say that I have fallen into those traps as well. So, but I'm definitely a work in progress. So yeah, there's definitely things that I continue to work on myself. So, I'll be the first to own that.
helpful. And I love owning it, right? When we talk
Yep.
about accountability, that's really what it is. What is accountability? It's not a blame or shame game. It's I own this. This part of me exists too. This, this too, this too. What I think you do so beautifully, actually, and this is what I thought you were going to say, is in this culture, people, if you're not, and I thought you were going to say busy, you said if you're not, I thought you were going to say busy, because it's something that I think you are so uniquely qualified to really help people address, that productivity does not equal worth,
Oh
and
yeah.
speed doesn't equal self-worth.
Mhm.
So, the seasons, just like you were talking about, happiness is a season that can come and go. So can productivity. Do you want to speak on that, or I see you nodding your head?
Yeah, I can. I totally believe that productivity does not equal your worth, and yet we are sold on this idea all the time. In fact, one of my favorite books that I just read, it's called Laziness Does Not Exist. And it's this brilliant book that just really pushes back against this grind and hustle culture. And I have find that for whatever reason, so many of my patients in my therapy practice self-identify as perfectionists. And what's really interesting is perfectionists get a bad rap, but in fact, it's a gift. But it's all about like channeling our energy, protecting our energy. But I think I said earlier in the interview that anything that you do that makes you feel connected to yourself, that makes you feel regulated, that fills you up, that is meaningful, is productive. So if come back from home, a long day at work, and what I want to do is just watch an hour of TV in my pajamas, my one little voice in my head be like, Kelsey, what are you doing? You have dishes in the sink. You got to send that email. But then there's this other part that I might elevate that says, Kelsey, sitting on the couch and watching TV is productive because your body is telling you something. You're tired. You need to rejuvenate. So it is in that vein productive. And I think the challenge and like the work is, can we start to dismantle and identify what it means to be a worthy person, a productive person?
Yeah. It's so curious that you give the example of TV, because that's often what I talk about with coaching clients, adults and teens alike, is we all know the feeling of when you lie down and it's so rejuvenating to be in that show and be like, man, that felt good. And then, and this is part of the work, I completely agree with you. We also know the feeling where it's escape, avoidance, right? And right? So the person looking from the outside walks in and sees you on the couch, and they think whatever it is they're going to think. It's not your responsibility to organize what they're thinking of you. But on the surface, it's you on the couch watching TV, but such different intentions there and such different outcomes. One is rejuvenation and reset button, and one actually we turn it off and we feel more anxious. We feel worse.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I just kind of woke up from that binge and that didn't serve me at all. I love, love, love what you're saying, because I think a lot of us need to hear, adults included and parents included, that downtime does not equal laziness.
Yes.
It
Yes.
just
Laziness is
doesn't.
not a thing. It's not a thing. I don't
Can
think
you
it is.
can you actually tell me more about that? Because I would say one of the, I don't know if it's the primary, but something that I hear a lot when folks are calling for executive functioning is, just help me or the one that I love be less lazy. I know they can do it. I know I can do it, whatever the it is. And laziness is getting in the way. How, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but how would you begin to approach that?
So I think the reason why I say like laziness doesn't really exist is it has a lot of roots in shame. Like when we say someone is lazy, it's never a good thing. It's never like this positive label that we put on someone is like, and I think this was a big thing even when I was growing up. I'm a kid of like the late 80s, early 90s. And it was really frowned upon to just kind of be idle. Because my parents, my grandparents, they came from a time period where you had to really work hard. And if you weren't working hard, you were failing your family. And I think there's just like a lot of roots in like industrialization and consumerism and all those things. And now kind of like fast forward, what does it mean to be a healthy person, a happy person? And when I look at when I am with a student, for instance, and maybe they're like, I'm so lazy, or my parents think I'm really lazy, I might say, well, like, when you're kind of doing what you're doing, how does it fill you up? Like, why do you do the things that you do? And if this quote unquote thing means like they're lazy, like I'm just scrolling on my phone, that's a big thing right now. I might say, when you're scrolling through your phone, what's going on? Are you noticing that you're completely numbing out? And are you engaged in what you're looking at? Are you invested? Is there something that you're trying to get out of it? Are you trying to avoid something? Are you trying to avoid really uncomfortable feelings? So I get into the intention behind it, and maybe what they're trying to escape, trying to not feel, right? And then digging a little bit deeper into that. But even going a little bit further down, being a teenager, being a human is a lot of work. It's exhausting work. I think I mentioned the very, very beginning of this interview, the amount of stimulation that we experience every day is just enormous.
Yeah.
And there's only so much our brains can take. And so when I think about someone that self-describes them as lazy, be like, maybe your body and your brain is trying to tell you something that you've been missing, right?
Mhm.
So I'd like to come at it as from like a very compassionate stance, and like, how can you flip the script so that you're not beating yourself down? You're thinking about, how do my behaviors translate into what maybe I'm really hoping and wanting and needing.
And I love how you put it earlier when you were talking about energy output, or what did you call it? Energy regulation rather than
Yeah, or like
time.
energy
regulation.
management or whatever. Yeah.
It's a beautiful way to approach things. I mean, it is a reframe, but it's not just kind of a cheap trick of words. We're really looking at not how am I doling out my time so I can maximize my output, but how is my energy, how is it flowing? Where is it going? What am I doing? And where am I running on empty? And one of the things, as you well know, all those with ADHD have executive functioning challenges. Ergo, many of our clients have ADHD, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. One of the common questions we get is, I want an EF coach. I need an EF coach. Oh, wait a minute. You only work on Zoom? I have trouble paying attention. There's so much information anyway, right? Coming at me all the time. I'm on screens a lot of the day. One more thing on my plate that is in the medium of a screen. How is that possibly going to work? So what would you tell either a potential client or a parent?
Definitely. So I think at the start of the pandemic, when so many services were taking place virtually, I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, how am I going to make this work? And I admit in the beginning, I was really nervous and somewhat even resistant to doing everything online. But then I made this mental shift where I was like, I decided I'm going to not only accept working virtually, but I'm going to try to embrace it. So I find that environment is important. And I think I mentioned earlier, like what a typical session would look like. That's exactly why I might spend the first 5-10 minutes thinking about, like, look at the environment around you. Is there something that's catching your eye? And is there something that's pulling your attention away? It's like, well, do you need to then change the lighting? Do you need to draw the curtains? Do you need to go into a different room? Do you need to put your phone in the other room for a little while? Do you need to put it on silent? So do you have a beverage? Do you have water? Are you sitting on a comfortable chair? Right. So like trying to eliminate distractions, but not only that, just like you got to be comfortable, I think too. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And um I might also recommend folks is that with this comfortability, does it make sense for you to have things around you that you find really comforting? Like, do you need something to squeeze, right? I even like having at my workstation, I always have a plant, a cup of tea, and sometimes a candle burning, and it just really grounds me, and it's a ritual. So when you know that you're about to go into an hour Zoom session once a week, can you ritualize it? Like, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, Zen, or as close as you can, right? And you get into it. So if you can ritualize it and make it special and interesting and unique, I think that really helps. Even more like logistic stuff and like technology wise, as Zoom features go, I utilize screen sharing quite often. I try to mix things up. Like if I see someone being like, it's like, okay, we got to spice things up. We got to, I might even say like, do you just like want to stand up and stretch for a moment? Can we take a 30-second break? And I like to have a lot of variety. My mind starts to wander after about 10 minutes of just talking. And so that's why I'll throw in maybe a YouTube video or a game or a handout or worksheet. Sometimes I find that I want to connect with people on a personal level. So I might say, okay, we did 30 minutes and so, 30 seconds. What's your favorite movie? Go, like just to kind of spice it up, get attention back, make it fun, make it interesting. Bottom line is I just try to make my time as interactive and engaging and collaborative as possible.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I think you started to touch on the last question, which is group coaching versus one-on-one coaching. Do you have thoughts? Our model right now is individualized. And do you have thoughts about the effectiveness of that or thoughts about one-on-one versus group coaching?
Definitely. So I think generally speaking, group formats have the potential to be amazing. Like I've led a lot of support groups and skills groups over the course of my time as a therapist. Absolutely wonderful. But there's a time and a place. There's a reason why we have two separate offerings or lots of different offerings. I think though, when we're thinking about executive functioning, group coaching, I just find there's a potential for it to be incredibly distracting, especially because you know, maybe there's a couple of folks in the group format where they do have ADHD, maybe diagnosed, undiagnosed, and there's just too many faces, there's too many voices. I don't want to be on camera. I do want to be on camera. Well, I need to talk about this. Well, this is taking, I want to talk about this. So there might just be a lot of like competing needs, which is fine. And I think that in a one-on-one setting, you can just cover a lot more ground, I think, in an hour. And while groups obviously serve a really important function, I think in this context, there's just much more focused, deliberate time being paid to an individual. When I think of a student that's in high school, they're in group settings literally all day, Monday through Friday, like aside from one-on-one tutoring, they're used to the group format already. So I think that I see this one-on-one coaching as this like really sacred, special time just for you. And it's like you're doing yourself a service, you're honoring yourself. So I think that in this context, one-on-one is just really effective, I think.
Well, you are delightful, as anybody who's listened all the way to the end at this point can see. Do you have any final thoughts? I'll give the final word to you. Anything else you'd like to say?
I guess the last thing is if you're, watching this video and say like, yeah, Kelsey, you seem like a pretty cool hip person. I'd love to work with you. I want you to know, like, I want to work with you too. I'm going to challenge you, but I don't want to challenge you to the point where I'm going to burn you out or I'm going to exhaust you. So let's talk to each other. Let's have a really open, honest relationship. And I get really excited to do this work. So I guess that's the last thing I'll say.
Love it. Thank you so much for carving out the time today. Kelsey, thank you. Until next time.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.